Welcome to What's the Scenario with PLRB, where we explore claims and coverage scenarios relevant to insurance professionals. I'm Brandon McLaughlin.
I'm Mike Brode.
I'm Tim Havler.
And I'm John Hurley, coverage counsel at PLRB.
Welcome, John.
Hey,
So
John.
what's the scenario today?
Well, first, I just want to put out a warning that the scenario I'm about to present does concern suicide. So I just want that to be known up at the front. So we have an insured who is the 21-year-old son of the named insureds and lives with the named insureds. He suffers from depression. While his parents are away, he goes through a breakup and decides to kill himself. He gets very drunk and douses the entire first floor in gasoline that's used for their lawnmower. He turns over a candle and goes upstairs to pass out. A neighbor calls the police in time and the young man is saved, but the resulting fire consumes the house. So today, we're going to review the intentional loss exclusion, which can be quite complex depending on fact scenarios and state law, both statutory law and case law. The intentional loss exclusion embodies the idea that insurance is meant to cover fortuitous instances, accidental things, not intentional losses. So without the intentional loss exclusion, fraud could run rampant. You just insure your property or overinsure it, purposely destroy it to collect a check. So that's the reason that we have the intentional loss exclusion. So now I'd like to read to you exactly how the intentional loss exclusion appears in ISO's HO3 homeowners form.
Okay.
The exclusion precludes coverage for any loss arising out of any act an insured commits or conspires to commit with the intent to cause a loss. In the event of such loss, no insured is entitled to coverage, even insureds who did not commit or conspire to commit the act causing the loss.
Wow.
So that second sentence is very important, and it can be very harsh because what it means is, for example, if a husband going through a divorce decides he's going to get back at the wife because she gets the house while he's still an insured, he lights the house ablaze to spite her. And because he's an insured who committed the act, she's an insured, she might not recover despite the fact that she's wholly innocent of that. And she could be completely without recovery in that regard.
Wow. I can see how that would be unexpected maybe if you're hey, I'm a policy holder, I pay my premiums, I'm cooperating in every way I'm expected to, but because of actions I didn't take, I'm not covered. That's yeah, that can be harsh.
Right, and there are some exceptions to that we will get to later. But right now, I just would like to focus on breaking down the criteria for the exclusion. So 2 criteria must be met. The first is that the act must be committed by or at the direction of an insured. So the first thing you have to do is show that the person who did it qualifies as an insured under the definition provided in the policy. Secondly, the act must be committed with the intent to cause a loss. And intent, because it can be subjective, can sometimes be a little difficult to prove.
Yeah, that's where I'm at, John, with this one, because I can see the purpose of the exclusion. If my intent was to burn down my property for insurance proceeds, I'm with you. But here, was the intent to cause damage to the home or cause damage to himself in the suicide attempt? That's where this one I struggle with, I guess, in my mind.
Yeah, and you're not alone. Lots of courts have done that, and courts have looked at the language in prior forms to find loopholes, if you will, to find coverage in instances like that. For example, let's assume that the son is in fact an insured. So to be an insured, he has to be a relative of the named insureds, which of course he is because they're a son, and he has to be a resident of their household. So if he was just visiting for the weekend and did this, no intentional loss exclusion.
Okay.
So let's assume that he was in fact still living at the house, qualifies therefore as an insured. This is where it gets tricky, as Mike alluded to. There are certain instances where courts have found that the perpetrator lacked the ability to form the requisite intent for the exclusion to apply. What do I mean? Certain people, for example, having mental handicaps, mental health problems, sometimes the age of the insured. So if you have a youth depending on how young they are and the circumstances surrounding the action and what the action actually was, were they able to understand what they were doing and realize the consequences of their acts, that what they were doing was substantially certain to occur, put it that way. So you're not necessarily going to get out of the intentional loss exclusion just because of age, but it's something that you're going to stop and check and look at. And another possibility of getting out of is intoxication. So if someone, like in our scenario, was drunk or they were on drugs, what have you, something that could impede their ability to form the intent, courts might look at that and say, well, they couldn't have formed the intent. However, recently, and I'd say recently, courts move quite slowly. In the past 20 years or so, I'd say courts have a lot less patience for the intoxication argument, but certainly still open to mental health and mental handicap arguments for saying that they could not form the requisite intent for the exclusion to apply.
Yeah, I was going to say with the intoxication defense, seems to me if it's something like, I don't know, accidentally taking medication in the wrong way or something where that led to your diminished mental state, that seems to be a more sympathetic case than just getting drunk, where you're voluntarily engaging in something that you know is going to give you diminished capacity.
Certainly. I mean, that's an excellent point. The idea is that if you intentionally drink or you intentionally take the drugs, to then say, well, I am absolved of all my sins because this has this effect on the brain, that's a lot different than, as you're saying, is if, let's say, God forbid, someone unbeknownst to you gave you something in your drink or what have you, and then you couldn't control yourself. You were out of your mind because you didn't know what was going on. I think courts and juries would be a lot more sympathetic to that argument.
It still seems really different from, you think of why they have the intentional loss exclusion. You might picture someone who's, creating an arson situation to commit insurance fraud to get a check that they wouldn't have otherwise got. That situation where you have that like almost malicious intent is really different from a case where you got someone who's drunk, young, maybe not a child, but young and depressed and suicidal. I mean, seems really different from the situation that was maybe imagined when you think of the intentional loss exclusion normally.
Yes. Well, what you raise is clearly a black and white situation. No one would argue what I said earlier, for example. The husband, soon to be divorced, goes in to spite the wife because he loses the house. He torches it. No one's going to get it. If I can't get it, no one's going to get it. That's black and white. Now, the fact that the wife could be an innocent co-insured, we'll get to that later. But that would be black and white as far as the husband's concerned. And now with our scenario, another possible problem, and I think it's probably aligned with the idea of mental health problems, is the suicidal person. We say, generally speaking, suicidal people are not in their right minds when they do what they do. So, would that be a defense? Certainly, in some cases, it could be. And I would say 20, 25 years ago and more, it would almost be, not certainly, but more likely than not, you would probably get out of the intentional loss exclusion. In other words, you would be able to recover. There's been a recent trend called the inferred intent doctrine. And what that holds is, basically, for example, if you're going into your garage and you're dousing it with gasoline and you light a match because you want to kill yourself or whatever it is, and the house goes up in flames, the court is saying it was so likely to happen, the fire that is, that consumed the house, that even though you desired to kill yourself, it doesn't matter because that's most likely was going to be the outcome. And therefore, you're not absolved from that. And it's very strong. It started, I wouldn't say it started, but it's very strong in Ohio. And other states seem to be kind of falling in line about the idea of like, what do you think is going to happen with gasoline and fire? And so, that's a possibility in our scenario here. So we have a couple of things to look at our scenario, because you're talking about suicidal intent, intoxication, and the idea that he intended to kill himself, not destroy the house.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like the natural consequences of the actions that you're taking. That's one way to think about intent.
Right. So if for example, if our 21-year-old in this scenario had no prior history of mental health problems and did what he did, so he isn't insured, lit the mat or knocked over the candle, and you say the argument would be, well, he didn't intend to destroy the house. Inferred intent doctrine would say, no, you would probably be forbidden from recovering. And so that gets us to the next sticky wicket, if you will, which is the idea of the innocent co-insureds, i.e. his parents.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to kind of raise that because, each step we took to get here made a lot of sense. Maybe you have two insureds who, and the one commits an arson, and so the other one's held responsible to that, sure. And then, sure, it makes sense that if you have a son who they live there full time, they count as an insured. And sure, it makes sense that, hey, you might be drunk, you might be suffering from depression, but there's still an intent aspect there. Each one of those steps makes sense, but in this situation, when you put it all together, you've got these parents who stepped away. They think of themselves as the policyholders. They went away, came back, their house is burned down, and are they really going to recover nothing?
Now, wait a minute, John. Sorry to jump here, but before we get into these fairness arguments, what about the policy? Because I thought I remember John reading a policy provision, which was pretty specific.
Right. And some of the language was tightened up starting in the year 2000 because courts were reading, for example, an insured could just mean one person. And they tightened up that language, saying that no insured is entitled to recovery, even insureds who did not commit or conspire to cause the act. And again, the exact language that I read earlier is, in the event of such a loss, no insured is entitled to coverage, even insureds who did not commit or conspire to commit the act causing the loss. So that's pretty airtight language as far as the insurance company is concerned, is that in these scenarios, they mean it. That to you, it could look unfair because the son does it one night in a breakup and intoxication, and the parents are away. But the insurance company is looking at it like, this isn't insured, and they purposely burned the property, and that's the way we look at it. So that can have the harsh outcome, and that's why courts have been very, very strictly scrutinizing that language, and that's why the language they tried to tighten it up. Now, for example, there's one exception in certain states that have the standard fire policy. So the standard fire policy, whether they adopt it via case law or statutorily, is basically the minimum coverage that a state's insurance must afford. So you can give more, but this is the basement level. You have to at least do this much. And in a lot of those policies, they refer to conduct of the insured, which courts have used and contrasted with an or any insured. And so in those SFP, standard fire policy states, some courts had said, because the minimum coverage would allow the innocent co-insured arguably to recover, we therefore are not going to enforce this as written. So in other words, if this was in an SFP state, the parents might be able to recover. On the other hand, again, as harsh as it sounds, if you're able to prove the elements of insured, act, intent, the parents more likely than not would not be able to recover for the act that their son committed.
So, John, to clarify, when they mentioned the insured, is that then their thought is that applies only to the named insured then?
They use it as, I think the way, what they mean by that is it's the insured who can't recover. So
Okay, the
what
insured
they
who
mean by
caused
that
the
then is
loss.
the courts then look at that and say, in this instance, then the insured is the person who committed the act.
Okay,
Therefore, it does not speak to the innocence. And because the minimum coverage does not speak to the innocence, then we will allow the innocent co-insureds to recover.
okay,
So in the case of the soon-to-be divorced husband, for example, he wouldn't be able to recover for his insurable interest in the house, but his wife would be in that situation, in an SFP situation.
And that's a hard one for the companies who don't like that result, because how do you draft around it? The standard fire policy, that's statutory. So no matter how specific you try to make that provision in the intentional loss exclusion, if you're in a standard fire policy state, the standard fire policy is memorialized in the books.
Right. And as you said, if it's statutorily done, it's like every other statute. The statutes are going to usually, trump the policy language. And if the legislation says that this is the minimum and you can't give less than that, then yeah, you're stuck if you're in a standard fire policy state.
And I don't think this was in your scenario, John, but it just got my limited wheels moving in my head here. But thinking that maybe in that case, let's say in your husband and wife are going through the divorce, husband starts the fire, might there be a cause of action that the insurance carrier, if they paid claim to the wife, could go after the responsible husband to collect back under like a subrogation type action, maybe?
Yes, but generally speaking, you're not allowed to subrogate against your own insureds.
Well, he's not insured now because he did this dastardly deed.
No, he isn't insured, and that's the reason he's not recovering, because he isn't insured.
All right, I tried.
If he weren't an insured, then there would be no question that the wife.
Okay.
All right, John. So what can we take away from this scenario?
For the intentional loss exclusion to apply, the act in question must be performed by or at the behest of an insured. So first thing you have to do is, was the person who did it an insured? If so, then you have to worry about intent. Was the act itself intentional, and did the perpetrator have the requisite intent, form the requisite intent? Were they able to form the requisite intent to make it an intentional loss? And while the policy is clear that no insured should be able to recover if any insured commits such an act, policy language and state law should be consulted to see whether or not that standard would apply. Mike, where can an adjuster go to learn more about this?
Well, lots of places, but first I wanted to mention that given our scenario here involved in attempted suicide, I did want to mention to folks out there that, hey, if you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, please contact the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, and that's easy to remember. It is 988. So give that number a call if you or someone you know has experienced a situation like this. But to get to your question, John, yeah, you can always reach out to us at plrb.org. Under the legal section, I think you're going to find some cool PLRB homeowner annotated keys. There's going to be some 50-state surveys about innocent co-insureds. And I'm sure you just do a simple search, find that awesome information, or as always, if there's a question still remaining after you've done some self-service work, you can always reach out to find people like Tim and John and ask a question of PLRB. They'll be more than happy to research it. So, Brennan, would you be kind enough to share these links in the show notes for us? You're muted, Brennan. That's destroying the whole show note thing.
Yes, and there you'll also find a recap of the key points from this episode and links to our social media. Don't forget to subscribe and rate us, and please give us a call at 630-509-8704 and leave a voicemail to share your adjuster story. All right, we'll see you next time.
We have to start from scratch now with that awkward pause.
The views and opinions expressed in this resource are those of the individual speaker and not necessarily those of the Property and Liability Resource Bureau, its membership, or any organization with which the presenter is employed or affiliated. The information, ideas, and opinions are presented as information only and not as legal advice or offers of representation. Individual policy language and state laws vary, and listeners should rely on guidance from their companies and counsel as appropriate.